How do I pronounce your last name? I know we're live right now, but
Halloran.
just let me know.
Halloran.
Halloran? Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Also,
Awesome.
hey, you usually works too.
Yeah, we got this guy here
He
on
just
the
picked him up off the side of the street somewhere,
yeah.
and
I was just on my way
maybe
to a
he knows.
Starbucks. Quick question. We need to
Already
talk
got
about.
it.
Yeah, nice. There you go. I was going to say, I got a coffee here too, but it doesn't have the
Perfect.
Starbucks on it. Nice. Cool. All right. We are officially live and recording. Perfect. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Creative Crew. My name is Brad Hussey, but you probably know that. Really excited for today's chat, conversation, workshop. We got our fellow crew member and friend, Ryan Halloran here, and we're going to be discussing crafting and creating clear and cohesive client engagements and agreements. This is, I think, an often overlooked piece of creative entrepreneurship and building sites for clients, working with clients, because, hey, a lot of us just want to get to the good stuff. And we just think, the handshake deal, the email that says, this is what we're going to do, that's good enough, right? Nay, I disagree. And so I brought in some big guns here to help us understand what we got to do, what we got to avoid, and maybe learn a few things that we didn't really know. So Ryan, why don't you introduce yourself? Take it away from here.
Fantastic. My name is Ryan Halloran. Brad, I wanted to say thank you right away for allowing me the opportunity to join in and to speak with the crew here. This is one of those topics, as you said, it can be kind of dicey. So a little bit about me, Ryan Halloran, founder and CEO of Red Star Consulting based in the Oklahoma City area, central United States. I started my organization about 6 years ago after working for about 20 years in corporate America. Decided it was time to just sort of step away from the kind of the corporate rush and run of things and try to sort of break down and move into more of a foundational perspective of taking that experience that I've had over those 20 years and delivering it to individuals that really on the day-to-day need that assistance but can't afford your sort of big three, big five type consultants. So my focus has always been in information technology, but now I sort of work both in operations and IT and helping to deliver those solutions out to a whole bunch of individuals that really need that help. Those small businesses, that SMB vertical is really the foundation of our society everywhere you go in the world. So I really believe that it is of the utmost importance that we deliver as much information as we possibly can to make those businesses successful. So here we are. This is where we are, and I get to deliver probably one of the most, as you said, Brad, the most dry and somewhat uninteresting and overlooked topics in all of doing business, but it is, to the point, one of the most important.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I will back you up on it is one of the most dry and, boring parts, but it's, and this is maybe going to be a bit of a cheesy tie-in, but my kids really love watching Bluey. I don't know if you've ever heard of that show. Yeah. So Bluey, it became very popular. It's on Netflix and wherever else, or Disney Plus. Anyway, it's a cartoon show about these blue healers, and it's an Australian show. And anyway, one of the episodes, the dad was taking the kids swimming, and the mom was lying on the couch and was like, "Okay, have fun. Did you pack the towels? Did you bring the umbrella? Did you do this? Did you bring the sunscreen and the snacks?" And he's like, that stuff's boring. We're just going to go to the pool. And nobody listened. She said, "Hey, the boring stuff, like, it's really important. You got to do the boring stuff. It'll help you enjoy yourself more." They didn't listen to her. They went to the pool. Needless to say, the day was ruined because they couldn't be in the sun. They didn't have their sunscreen. They were all hungry. They didn't have snacks. They didn't have the pool toys. And then the mom came and rescued and saved the day and came with all the boring stuff. And then they all had fun. So though creating sites and doing client work and consulting and doing your best work is the fun stuff, it's the boring stuff that allows you to do your best work with the boring stuff. So why don't you springboard, no pun, actually fully pun intended there, springboard into the, let us know, what do we really need to know here? And even though, it's the boring stuff, it really is the good stuff that makes it a successful engagement, a successful client relationship. Tell us like these key elements, the critical steps, like maybe just take it away and tell us what we really need to know here.
So let's start kind of with the basics, right? So first of all, let's make sure we're ultra clear on this. I don't know about you, Brad, we were just talking about this a moment ago. If you don't have the snacks, the day goes sideways. When you have kids, everything goes sideways. The snacks need to be there. So that's what we're going to give you. Is we're going to give you the snacks today. At least give you the way to get to said snacks. So let's sort of start talking about the basics, and let's put the disclaimer into this at the very top of this, right? First of all, I am not an attorney. I do not have a law degree, but I do have a very deep background in doing client negotiations, client contracts, client agreements. So take what's here with a grain of salt. I would believe that most of the people that we are speaking to as a part of this, that would be watching this, are also not attorneys either. However, you do have very basic ways to be able to protect yourself and your business as you move through. The second piece, the second disclaimer to this that I would just very briefly touch upon would be, really at the end of the day, make sure that you're aware of where you are from a geographic location, the country that you're in, the state that you reside in, the province that you live in, largely because each of those areas have their own different places. They have their own different criteria for the different agreements. So make sure that you're clear on what those things are. If you are ever in doubt, yes, find an attorney. But really at the end of this particular workshop, you shouldn't have to worry about that terribly much. It should only be the one-off type cases. So with that being said, let's dive into this. So to me, the crux of any good agreement that you have between yourself and a client is transparency. Legal agreements, legal contracts always seem to be extremely detailed, written in this legalese that nobody necessarily understands. Frankly, it's not necessary. You can craft and write agreements, contracts, however you want to frame the verbiage behind it, in very clear language that does not have to be that legalese that everybody believes it needs to be. When you write those elements that we'll talk about in a moment, they need to be clear so that you have transparency, and transparency is what builds trust with your clients. Would you engage with a client or with a vendor, a third party, where they were going to give you an agreement or a contract that you pick it up and you read it and go, I don't understand what this is? You wouldn't want to engage with those individuals. So why, when you are working with your prospective clients, why would you want to do that to them? Transparency is really the key when, as freelancers, sole proprietors, LLCs, it's really the foundation to what we need to be able to deliver. So make sure that you understand, the clearer you can make it, the better off, then the better chances you have of having a strong relationship with that prospective client. Part one. Okay. Part two.
Taking notes.
I strongly advise everyone to do due diligence on the businesses that you're working with. Most every country, most every province, most every state has some sort of business registration website. So at least in the US, I know the US, Canada, Australia, all have a website that you can go to that will allow you to be able to look up businesses and businesses information to do some level of validation that you're actually working with some kind of an organization that has the bona fides necessary, that says, yeah, I'm working with someone who is legitimate, someone who's real, and this is not some sort of scam. Now, does that mean that they can't still be doing something nefarious? Sure. The likelihood, though, is that you're probably not going to be touching that. So please make sure that you do the due diligence. Go out, look at a Secretary of State, look at a business operation. Make sure that there is that information behind that business before you actually start this process of crafting agreements. So then we start to transition into, what does your agreement really look like, right? A lot of this is going to be really kind of simple, right? When I craft agreements and when I work with my clients where I'm trying to educate, coach on how to create proper agreements, there's really three key sections. Now, there's a whole bunch of information underneath each section, but there's three key sections. There's basically your entrance, right? So there's the foundational terms of the agreement. There is your financial terms of your agreement. And then there is your exit terms or your dissolution of the agreement. Those three buckets are really the key elements that you hit. Your foundational is really all of your basics. Let's start with the one that everybody forgets. The very, very top of your agreement needs to have your business name and the name of the business that you are going into agreement with. Brad, it is amazing the number of clients that I work with who start an agreement by going right into, well, these are the deliverables or these are the timelines. Put your name on it. I mean, we did that in grade school, right? You know, in elementary school, write your name on the top of the paper, right?
Name and date.
The number one aspect is you have to identify who's part of the agreement. If you don't, it's all void. Doesn't work. Can't be something that's verifiable. So, part one. Now you start to go into all of the sort of the more nitty-gritty details. You have your dates, right? When does the agreement begin? When do the terms of this agreement end? That is often referred to as a period of performance. This is when you are agreeing to, this is when things are going to start and this is when things are going to end. That, while those dates may seem to be somewhat nebulous in general terms, they are actually extremely important. Why? Because when you are actually crafting that agreement, it's a way for you as a business owner to say, hey, I understand that you're going to develop this particular set of deliverables that are listed in this agreement. But guess what? I need to be able to push you out 3 weeks, 3 months, whatever that is, so that we know when specifically this agreement is going to take place. Not all agreements, not all contracts start immediately. So being clear in that period of performance is very critical as you're crafting that. Now, doesn't mean that you can't put today's date in or yesterday's date in or whatever it is, but it is important that you have what that period of performance actually is. The next critical piece is your deliverables. Now, this is exactly what you intend to place into what you're giving to your clients. When that period of performance is over, this is what you intend to leave behind with them. Now, there is some conversation about the level of specificity that goes into this. And Brad, you can probably directly speak into this, right? Because you have, really a summary of what your deliverables are, right? You're going and starting an engagement with a client and you have a general idea of what it is that they're asking you for. But as you progress into that agreement and you actually kick it off, you start to learn more about, this is actually what we're going to be delivering. So for some agreements, you may simply just have nothing more than a very high level summary of what you intend to execute upon. Other times you will have actual itemized deliverables where you can specifically say, these are the things that I'm going to be delivering to the client. Specificity inside of your deliverables as much as possible is mission critical. If you can provide the specificity, do it. If you must leave it more broad, make sure that you are articulating as part of that you are leaving this broad sort of description of what those deliverables are, specifically because you're going to learn more about it as you go into the engagement. So, Brad, I'll ask you, because I know you've worked in so many different clients, different types, different verticals. What do you typically see? Do you typically see more of that broad-based sort of deliverable description, or do you actually get ones where you can get real specific in them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know that there have been, in certain projects and contexts, it's really easy to be kind of loose and broad because, they're smaller projects. You can really see the finish line from the beginning. It's smaller scope. Or let's say it's more of a productized service where you know exactly what you're delivering every single time. And that's the benefit of, say, a productized service is you can almost with 100% clarity and certainty say, here's exactly what you get and here's exactly what you don't get. And so that's always nice. But when you're not doing a productized service, you're going to have much more of an open-ended, well, you got to talk to the client and understand their problems and their unique needs and then the unique solutions. And that creates branches of complexity that you need to account for. And I've definitely sent and signed contracts that have been both simple, where you get A, B, C, and D, nothing more, nothing less. And I've signed agreements that have been like, here is the broad scope and here's all the potential and all the contingencies and what can happen, and where you have this giant agreement that accounts for it all, so that if you ever come across like a scenario where you go, is this in scope, is this not, like, then you have to have that, because otherwise you can get yourself in some hot water pretty quick.
Absolutely. And I think that you hit on one of the critical mass elements that we were going to move into next, is that concept of, as you are writing those deliverables, it is mission critical that you actually define those items that are out of scope. These are the deliverables that we are not going to actually do. And here's why, right? Because otherwise the slippery slope goes forever down, right? Yeah. So being able to clearly articulate those things, because let's be fair, I don't know about you, Brad, but I have all kinds of clients that are like, yeah, I want this and this, and somehow or another they try to slip this or that or whatever else in after the fact. I'm sure that anybody who sees this is going to go, oh yeah, we all know at least that one client that tries to grab everything, right?
Yeah.
So the tag on, and so this is where I've seen people miss as part of this. Now, when you have that productized service, Brad, like you're talking about, really it becomes really easy because you know specifically what's in and out. When you have those more general sort of items that are out there where it's not very clearly defined, the section to that deliverables that people tend to miss is an assumptions section. When you are developing a large list of client deliverables, you will often find that you are making certain assumptions about what may or may not be part of the scope or part of what your client has as part of their stack of what they're bringing to the table. Because we all know, as soon as you start to peel back the layers of the onion, you're going to discover things that, oh, oops, I didn't realize that was going to be there. So to clearly state the things that you are sort of assuming are in place is really important as you go into that. That is, amongst a variety of these that we're going to talk about today, the assumptions area is your get out of jail free card, one of them, because you have the capacity to then go back if there is a disagreement in a deliverable. You have the ability to go back and say, look, I made a certain assumption about what was in this. That assumption was incorrect. So now we need to modify that as part of this particular agreement. So individuals will actually have that capacity to go, hey, my fault. Cool. We can figure this out. Let's go back and make sure that we're there because, we are clear on what those assumptions were. So even when your clients, are sort of going through the review of that agreement, they will also look at those assumptions. And oftentimes as they're reviewing that review, they can clarify those things for you before it's actually executed. So sometimes doing that is a way to just sort of jog that mind frame for what's going on. So the get out of jail free cards are my favorite, so I'm going to highlight them as we go through this whole thing. So once you get your deliverable set and all of those pieces, the next slippery slope that people tend not to address is confidentiality. There are a number of organizations where what you're actually assisting them with is part of the value proposition to their business. And that information coming out in any form or fashion could be devastating to their organization and how they operate. So I specifically write in anything that says, are there any confidential elements about what it is that we're working on from a terms, from a deliverables that is specific to this particular client? that can go both ways. It can say, hey, not only are you not allowed to talk about these particular items outside of this, it could also be any of the lessons learned that we have as a business. You are not allowed to use that information or that knowledge for a period of time after the fact. So, for example, this is an old one. I'm not going to use specifics, actual names. We'll use different names to protect the innocent. It's more of a organization had a new invention that they were working on. The invention was part of a platform that they were pushing out onto the web. We could have leveraged the learnings from that particular invention to use into offshoot products. It was highly applicable to a variety of other areas. We were not allowed to use any of the learnings that came from that for 12 months from the end of that particular contract. And the other side, the client side, actually had paper that said, hey, as a part of this confidentiality, we can come in and audit to see if you've actually done anything with this information. So I try to take a proactive step and say, as a part of my agreements, this is the stuff that we can talk about and use. This is the stuff we can't talk about and use in case someone has something to say about it. So confidentiality, critical. Yeah. So the next one, party responsibilities. Okay. Make sure that you're telling your client what they're responsible for. Write it out, make it clear. Things sometimes as simple as your client's responsibility is give me the name and phone number and email address of the person that I'm going to be in contact with. Tell me who it is and kind of what the hours of operation that you have so that decisions can be made. These are the windows in which I can call meetings with you in case I need information or we need to have conversations about deliverables. If there is something that you definitively are going to need from your client, make sure that you list it out as a part of those responsibilities. There's a catch to it. You also have to make sure you're doing it for yourself too. You have to hold yourself on the hook. Who's the person inside of your organization, your team, if you have multiple employees or multiple members, who's responsible on your side for being that point of contact? When are you available for decision making? All of those factors that go into it. Make sure that you have the responsibilities listed out. It makes it much, much clearer for people as they start to work into these. You will have a very defined flow, sort of a cadence that goes into your relationships with your clients, but those things take time to build. The upfront, you want to make sure that there are at least some very specific details laid out for how people will work together. Timelines is your next piece. I don't think I really need to go into that.
That one's
everybody knows about timelines.
Yeah.
And I wish we could take a poll. I would say, how many people have put a timeline into a project and have actually hit it? Because I've been doing this. I'm almost 50 now. I don't know if I hit a timeline in my life, maybe a couple of times.
Yeah.
So
I know I totally get that. Yeah. You're like, this is going to be 3 weeks, 6 weeks later. It's like, I have a quick thing I want to say about that actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
On timelines and budgets. Whenever someone's like, how much time should I account for this? And in addition to that, like, how much should I budget, in charge for this project? And I always say, like, we are really bad as people in estimating time and how much something's going to cost. So whatever you think it's going to be, take it and double it. And that's probably what it is. So if you're like, this is a 60-day project, you're like, well, make it 120, and whatever your budget was it $8,000, make it 16, because you're definitely not hitting either of those.
It never happens. It never happens. And sometimes, you want to be able to always go, okay, it was the client's fault. And you're like, oh yeah, maybe that was me.
Yeah.
Sorry. But you're right. It's the general rule of thumb. And I actually did have a client one time who used not a factor of 2, but of 3, because he just genuinely came out and said, I I am so lazy and I procrastinate things. So I just build in extra time. I'm like, I wouldn't go putting that out to your clients. I don't think they're
Yeah.
going to care for that too much. So yes, I agree with you, Brad. Make sure that, you're hearing and you're pushing that out, but don't say it too loud.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So we have timelines. The two last pieces are, one is more critical, the last not so much. Engagement change control. I'm sure everybody's heard of the term scope creep.
Yeah.
Everybody's heard it. It happens on every project. It goes into absolutely everything that we do. What I would say to you is try to at least create a generic version of a change control process that says, if your client comes to you with something that is absolutely and completely way out of the original scope that you had originally identified, make sure that there is a way that it gets submitted into you as the client, as the contractor, that comes into you. You have a chance to review it, evaluate it, determine what that does to your time, your cost, your resourcing, so that you can very clearly articulate back to your client that this is in fact a change and this is what it's going to do. Oftentimes, depending upon the size of the client or the timeline that you're looking at, they will either punt and say, yeah, maybe this isn't as mission critical as it needs to be for my delivery. Or the other side of it is they will start to create multiple phases to your engagement. This will turn into either an addendum to your existing agreement, or it will turn into another agreement where you start to have sort of that organically grown business inside of an existing client, which is one of the best ways to stay entrenched with one of your clients, is to find or have brought to you those opportunities for additional creation, additional value add to that client. So there's that piece of it. Change control, just make sure that it's all documented. Don't ever take somebody's word for it. Get it in writing. Even if that means when your client brings it to you, that you write it down and you document it, even if it's in an email, make sure that it's in writing. Don't ever just take someone's word for it. The last piece, and this is a much more simplistic thing, but it does matter in some geographical regions, are your resourcing. Make sure that you are clear in your agreements as to who is going to be working on a specific project. Sometimes it's just yourself. You're a sole proprietor LLC, or you're a freelancer, whatever the case may be. It may just be you. Other times you may have third-party vendors that you need to bring into an agreement in order to be able to deliver what's in those deliverables for your client. If you're going to do that, make sure that you are as clear as possible with the agreement that says, I'm going to be bringing in external people. In certain geographic locations, that is a very nuanced element of an agreement, because now you are bringing in a third party and your client does not necessarily have control over what that third party does or does not do, as the case may be. They are now depending on you to broker and manage that third party. So you need to be sure that it's clear to your client that you're bringing in external help to your business. So again, the transparency creates trust. Make sure that you're telling them that. Even if you can't give them specific names or locations, do your very level-headed best to be able to articulate that. So that really gives you all of the primary foundational items to your agreements. It's what you must have to start with, and it really outlines the terms of what you're actually going to be delivering to your clients. Perfect transition into what you were talking a second ago about. Everybody wants to talk about the money. So let's talk about the money. How are we getting paid, right?
Yeah.
Getting paid is the key. So first things first, what's your payment model, right? Is this a fixed fee engagement? Is this a milestone-based engagement? Is this an hourly-based engagement? Make sure that you are clear and articulate in what that looks like, especially when you're starting to talk about your milestone-based or your engagements that are more on an hourly perspective. Fixed fees, typically everybody knows what you're up against. There are overages that go into that. Sometimes there's some percentages that you can go over that fixed fee, which you can document into that agreement. So for a fixed fee, it might be, hey, our engagement is $10,000, but we can invoice you up to 11. Should there be some kind of an overage, and you're agreeing to that on the upfront. For milestone based, you have to be very clear. It's very difficult. These are the deliverables. We're going to get to these first 2 deliverables and you're going to pay us X. We're going to get to the next 3 deliverables and we're going to pay you Y, and then so on and so forth. My recommendation to most people, most businesses, is stay away from that milestone base. Unless your client is forcing you into it, try to stay away from it. Largely because it is a administrative, I'll call it a nightmare, because it really is. It's an administrative nightmare trying to keep track of all of the milestones and the acceptance of the deliverables, so on and so forth. Your hourly pieces, though, need to be very clear on what is the expected level of detail that your clients wish to have as a part of the timesheets that come across. Do they even want timesheets? Is there a limit to the amount of money that they're willing to spend for those hourly type of engagements, right? This is where you start to talk about rapport, the understanding of your client and what they're trying to get to, and what those deliverables actually are. So be clear on the type of the payment model that you're working in. Brad, I'll ask you, what do you typically work on? Do you typically work on fixed fee? Do you have schedules? How do you typically work?
Yeah. For me, I'll relate. There's a few phases here. I'll relate the early phase of my career that I know a lot of folks watching and watching live and after the fact. When I first started, and I was exclusively doing website design and essentially building websites for clients, it was essentially based on a phase-based structure where, in a project, you'd have your discovery and planning phase, you'd have your design phase, you'd have your build phase, and then you'd have your launch and handoff phase. So it essentially breaks down to 4 phases. Now, when you're first starting, you really don't know how you bill that. Do you say, like, here's the invoice, pay 50% up front, pay some at the end? It was really something you learn as you go. For me, in the earlier days, what I did start doing was, okay, here's the timeline for each phase, and there was a payment schedule, whether or not we were totally on schedule. Now, I don't know how standard this is, but for me, what tended to work was, here's the project. I would take my own advice and make it longer than I initially thought. So I'd say phase 1 is, this much of the budget, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And it wasn't always 25%, 25%, 25%. It would tend to be the bulk of it was at the beginning of the project, so that near the end of the project where things started to slow down or was a bit sluggish or there was a little bit of laziness, clients not like kind of staying on track, they had smaller invoices to pay. So there was less risk for me and it felt good for them. When we finished the project, it would be like, hey, here, there's a little invoice left just to finish it up. And it felt good. It almost felt like, hey, I'm not like dumping a whole bunch of cash near the end of this project. So I would essentially say, the payment schedule is this much up front. In 2 weeks from now, this invoice is coming. 2 weeks from then, this invoice, and then 2 weeks from then, this invoice. And I would do it something like that. Nowadays, when I do client engagements, service-based work, specifically in my email marketing and automations, that's essentially the services that I offer. It's productized. And so the clients pay 100% upfront. Unless it's above a certain budget, and then I will find a payment schedule that works. But it's essentially like, in order for me to start this, you agree to the terms in the engagement, you pay it upfront, we schedule the date, and it's also something that gets done the day that they schedule it. So if they schedule it for March 1st, that's when it's done. And that's it. So it's really easy that way. There's no wondering when it gets done or budget. It's just this price, this time, this date.
Transparency. You've created that very defined, very well written out. They understand, you understand. And so let's be selfish for a second, right? As business owners, one of those things that we always need to be mindful of is sort of that revenue stream that's coming in. Where are they coming? When are they coming? And when you're setting your models in that fashion and you have the dates that associate to it, granted, you're still going to have, and we'll talk about sort of net terms here in a second, but at the very least, you at least know when you can start to recognize that revenue in on book. And knowing those milestones that come through, so long as they're clearly defined and your client is willing to abide by them, it makes projecting where you're going to be as a part of your business throughout the year very easy to do, especially if you're able to sign paper, these agreements, say even months in advance. You have the capacity then to start doing that associated planning. So the point of all of that said, Brad, to your point, you have a model that works for you. For my model and a lot of the services that I do from operations consulting, a lot of it is, hey, I'm looking for 25 to 35% up front, and then there'll be sort of one or two sort of checkpoints in between, then the remainder at the end. Largely because most clients get super excited about projects at the beginning, and then at the end they don't want to pay anything. So I agree. You try to get it up at the front if you can, at least most of it. However, it is important to make sure that in that concept that you're gathering in and understanding where those things are going to hit. So be clear on those payment terms. Make sure that it works for you. Whatever the model is that you pick, whether it's something similar to what Brad does, whether it's what I do, whatever works for your business and makes the most sense, make sure that you are just extremely clear in how it works. Take the litmus test. Always test it. If I were to take these payment terms and hand them to me in my business, would I be willing to accept this? Is it strong enough? Is it clear enough where I would want to be able to abide by what's there? So all the ways, make sure that it's something that you feel comfortable and confident that a client will understand what it is at all times. I would also suggest, as you're going through what that payment model looks like, talk to other business owners. Bounce it off the wall. See what they have to say. I mean, just like, I could call Brad, hey man, I'm thinking about changing my model. You got 5 minutes to just hear me out on what this looks like, right? All of entrepreneurs, business owners, we support each other. We help each other. So don't be afraid to do that. Ask that question and see if, Brad, would you be willing to pay this in this model if you didn't, maybe, or yeah, I'm all in on that. That sounds like a great idea. The crux of this entire equation is, I hate this expression, but I'll use it anyway, skin in the game, right? You need to be able to clearly articulate to your client as a part of that payment model that they're putting skin in the game and you're putting skin in the game at the same time. If they don't feel like there is that carrot is dangling for you as the person who's delivering, they're not going to get in on it, right? So you've got to be thoughtful in how you are framing all of those aspects out to your prospective clients. Money is always sort of the catch to this. So make sure that whatever it is you're using as that carrot that you're dangling is one that is beneficial both to your client and to you at the same time. So there's your kind of your terms. The rest of this starts from a financial side, goes sort of downhill once you've decided on what your model looks like. You have your schedule of fees, right? You're breaking out sort of line by line to the best you possibly can all of the different fees that you have as a part of your engagement. Make sure, though, if it is applicable to you, that you are breaking out that schedule of fees into somewhat appropriate categories. The three that I typically see the most are capital expenditure. These are going to be things that are sort of long-term investment for your client. You have your expenses, which are basically dollars that are going to go out the door where there is really no return on whatever that investment is. A lot of times from an expense perspective, you're talking about travel and living expenses. You're talking about, one-off type engagements with things where you need something, but you're not necessarily going to see a long-term return on it. It's not necessarily depreciable by that particular client. And we won't go into all the accounting behind it, but that's really what an expense is. The last piece really is the services, right? Whether you want to call it just services, some people call it professional services. That is really your work, what your organization is doing to be able to deliver something out. Now, the other category that's in here is also product, which for product-oriented organizations, there's going to be the cost of goods that are being sold, and those pieces also will slide into here. But from a freelancer, sole proprietor, LLC, largely for what the folks in Creative Crew are doing, you're really seeing those three: capital investment, expense, and professional services. The one caveat I will throw on this for your capital expense: be mindful of who owns whatever that asset is at the end of the day. So for example, we do web design, right? So we'll throw it out to Wix. Most of us all use Wix. Awesome. We love it. And the consideration is who owns the website after you're done. Is it your client or is it you? That's one of those things when you go back into your deliverables, your assumptions, make sure you're writing that stuff in there. Largely because at the end of the day, most organizations will want to claim ownership over the web hosting, their domains, any of the other pieces that go along with it. Make sure that that's clear and make sure you ask those questions, especially if you're designing a website from scratch. Ownership is critical because it goes on book as asset or liability, depending upon what it looks like. Again, that's for your accountant to talk about. We're talking about agreements. Once you have all of that, the payment schedule set, you're starting to talk about your payment terms, right? How many people have seen that idea of, net 15 or net 10 or net, and you're like, oh, net? I'm like, we're not fishing here, basketball net. So that was awful. I got to take that out of these presentations. It's the worst metaphor ever. So the idea of net terms basically being, I'm going to issue you an invoice. When you receive that invoice, this is how many days you have to pay that invoice. It's very straightforward. Now, again, be mindful of your client as you're determining what those net terms are. The reason I say that is because based upon the client that you have, you may have to align to their revenue streams and the cycles of revenue that they have coming in for the payment of those invoices. They may say, hey, I'm not, you can send me the invoice on the first of the month, but I don't receive my, accounts receivable, my stuff coming in until the 15th. So you may want to set yours at a net 30 to give them an opportunity to make that payment. Other times, it isn't going to matter. You just sort of throw a number that's out there. Pretty standard net terms, 15 or 30, pretty standard. Some, again, depending upon the client, you may have the option to say, hey, this is a net 5 or a net 7 or due on receipt. The other thing that you may want to put into your net payment terms is late payment penalties. This is one of those where we start to talk about client risk, and we'll be relatively brief. As you evaluate the client and the clients that you're working with, especially those clients that you've worked with multiple times, you are going to establish sort of a risk threshold in how you work with them and whether or not they're able to deliver back to you in the time frame that you're looking for. Are they delaying projects? Are they delaying payments, right? So sometimes you need to forget about the carrot and start to dangle out that stick, right? So that you get them. What I would say, generally speaking, is it should not be punitive in major regard. Percentages usually work relatively well, 1%, 2% over X number of days as time progresses. You're on net 15, give them an extra 24 hours before you start hitting penalties. And then say it's 1% of the value of the invoice every 5 days or every 10 days, right? You only use it when it's absolutely necessary to collect, and do not use it all the time, because it will make you as a company, as an organization, as a freelancer, it will make it look like you're just out there to collect as much as you possibly can. That's not how you build rapport with your clients. I think I have used late payment fees. I mean, I'm well over 200 clients at this point. I think I can count on one hand the number of times I've used it. Brad, have you ever had to use anything like that to help control clients?
I think honestly, like I used it once in the early days, and it's like one of those things you can't undo when you do it. Like if you ding a client, like, hey, this is 2 weeks since you haven't paid, I've had to add this on it. And then it's on the invoice. Like it's almost like in my mind, it's almost like a bridge burner where you're like,
Yes.
I'm not going to work with this client. And if I'm throwing this out there, I probably know I'm not going to work with them again, and they're not going to want to work with me again. So it's kind of like it's a one-way sort of tactic. And I don't think it's something that we need to be pretty liberal in its usage.
It's definitely one of those things that I reserve for the very sort of the last straw, if you know that there's going to be a problem. So again, this is one of those things where you can put it into agreements, doesn't have to be there. Really hope that you shouldn't have to use it at any point, but just know that it's there as a tool that you can possibly use. Last two things for financial terms, and again, you could go way deeper into the financial pieces of it, but really the last two are easy. You have your accepted methods of payment. Make sure that you're telling people how you accept. Credit card, debit card, check, ACH, EFT, whatever it is, however you collect that, make sure that you are clearly stating that's in there. I had a client one time who never actually specified how they wanted to receive payments, and there's checks coming into a PO box, and they're like, you haven't paid me, and they're like, check your mail, So make sure that people understand what's there. It's not that hard. It's literally one sentence. There's that piece. The last piece is your invoicing mechanisms, right? Ask your client, do you want invoices by email? Do you want invoices by paper mail? How do you want them delivered? Sometimes you have clients who will have integrations with a variety of tools to not to plug it, but QuickBooks. Sometimes you can deliver invoices electronically from one instance of QuickBooks to another. Just make sure that they're clear on what that is so that you know how they're going to get that. Again, that helps you. You want your money? Make sure that they're getting the invoices as fast as possible. Simple enough. So again, you can go another mile deep on our financial terms, but really at the end of the day, those are your key elements. Use them smartly. Make sure, again, that they are super clear. You want your money? You want to make sure your client understands how they need to pay it. So that ends sort of your financial terms. Let's go into the last piece, and there's really one, maybe two critical aspects in that dissolution of an agreement. So there's your standard pieces, right? What is the completion criteria, right? What is it that your client what are you expecting of your client to do to say, I've reviewed the deliverables that you've said are going to come out of this, and I agree that they're acceptable based upon what those terms were that we laid out at the beginning. And how long does your client have to be able to review those and accept them? So again, it depends upon how you set this up and the rapport that you have with your client, as well as the quantity of those deliverables that you're bringing to them. If you're bringing a very complex, complicated, content-heavy website that has all kinds of, custom back-end development, you better be giving them several days to be able to go through all of it. They're going to want to be able to QA the living daylights out of that thing, and rightfully so. So make sure that you're sort of putting thresholds into that makes sense. But do make sure that you get some sort of documented sign-off from your client that says, yes, it's been reviewed. Yes, I approve them, and off you move on that particular piece. Then there's the other side of it, and this is where a lot of people tend to miss. I don't like talking about this, but it's sort of a necessity. This is your early termination of an agreement. Most every client that I've ever worked with always forgets this piece. There's two sides to early termination. There is your client side early termination where they're wanting to move forward. And then there's your side as the contractor, vendor, however you want to represent yourself, your termination. Believe me, I've invoked it. I've had clients where I'm like, see ya, I'm firing you because you're a bunch of morons. And yeah, I said it, they were morons. So let's talk about client side. Actually, let's just do it both at the same time. It's pretty straightforward when you think about it. So when a client says when you say you're going to terminate an agreement, there needs to be a minimum notice period. 30 days is typically normal depending upon the length of the actual agreement that you're working with. Obviously, if you're on a 30-day agreement, it may not even apply. Second piece, payment. Who is responsible for paying on what? A lot of times it will be, hey, guess what, Mr. Client, you owe us for all the work that's been done. Plus there's a 20% of the outstanding balance as a penalty for ending the agreement early. You want to consider that penalty. You may not want to frame it as a penalty. You may want to do it as like a early termination fee, right? Because what you want to do is put your client at a decision point to go, is this really worth me bowing out of this agreement at this point? Because it's going to cost me more to bow out than it is to stay in it. So put them at a decision point. The other side, the final piece is ownership of the asset. Making sure that it's very clear the work that has been done in whatever state it currently is at the time that early termination basically is enforced. All of that goes to the client and it's theirs at that point in whatever condition that it's in, and make sure that it states in the condition that it's in. Otherwise, you leave this sort of agreement/legal loophole of who's actually responsible for it. Should it have been finished? Same thing from a contractor side, from your side, make sure that you're saying, hey, this is what I expect to be paid. If you're leaving early, do I expect to be paid for any of the work? Do I not expect to be paid? How am I going to deliver the work that's been done? Am I going to release this to someone else, to another business to work on, so on and so forth? Everybody's early exit terms are going to be different. Make sure that you think through that and put it into an agreement. You'd be surprised how often, just very frankly, life happens. And especially freelancers and sole proprietors, life happens and they need to be able to pivot. So give them the option, give them the ability to do it. Last thing that you do inside of these, make sure that you have any sort of terms behind your post-delivery support, your post-delivery maintenance. Make sure that you say it. 30 days, we stand behind whatever we deliver for 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is. This is the prioritization, you get to it, and off you go, right? There is sort of in general terms, kind of just a couple of final thoughts that I usually give to everyone. Transparency is the key. If you can't read it and it doesn't make sense, nobody is going to want to participate. Nobody's going to want part of it. That's how you want to be treated. It's the golden rule. Make sure that it's transparent. It builds the trust. Agreements protect both your client and you. It's important that your client understands that you both have that skin in the game. Use it as a tool, but the crux of it should be to use it as a rapport builder of, I can trust you and you can trust me. And this is that middle ground that we both stand on in order to deliver. Enforceability of a contract, the agreement, is up to you. You can sit there and say, hey, yeah, I know I had this particular penalty in here, but you know what? We're going to waive that. And you know what? You look like the good guy. Could be a circumstance or a situation where that person just they need one. Give it to them. You have a choice in whether or not you enforce one of those terms inside of that agreement. And lastly, consider your client in your agreements. Think about who they are. Is this a single mother who is trying to start a side hustle and they need your help? don't make your agreements punitive. Think about what it is they need or what they don't need, and what is the best way to build that rapport, versus here's this big behemoth business, and that they can afford to do a little bit more, and you could be a little bit more structured with them. Think about not just the client as you're creating those, but think about the client's perception of you and your business as you go to enforce those agreements, because that's going to be the difference maker between I'm going to go refer this person to all of my other friends and help build your business organically, versus, hey, see this business over here, see this owner, they were a jerk. And all those, they had 1,000 terms in there. That understand that the perception that comes with your agreements is a reflection of who you are as an owner.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's like at the end of the day, the that I think a misconception that a lot of people have, specifically new freelancers, sole proprietors, they're worried that the agreement, it's going to scare the client away. It's too rigid. It's no, you're right. It shows like a professionalism, and it creates trust.
Yes.
On the flip side, if that agreement is, in your words, punitive, or they're reading through it and they're like, man, I'm afraid to work with this guy, then that's different. Or you're like, this guy's trying to gain control over everything, and I can't understand a word it's saying, and it's 40 pages long. Like, and this is a $5,000 web design project. What are we doing here? It's going to take me a week to read through this, and I got to hire a lawyer to make sure I'm not signing my firstborn child away. It's like,
absolutely,
make it clear. Like, as you said, this clear and transparent. Take into context the engagement. Like, is this a $50,000 project with a large company who's got a big legal team, and there's a lot hinging upon this, and there's a lot of risk? Okay, that's going to require more. Or are you doing a web design project, and it's you build landing pages for let's say the niche is, you said single moms. Let's say it's a single mom creating like she's starting up a YouTube channel, and she's created a course and some content, and you're going to help her build her landing page and, some key pages and some branding with some social content. Okay. Do you need to create some giant agreement that says, if you don't do this and you don't do this, we're going to penalize you here, and you got to pay this fee, and I own everything you do? And no, like, that's like, it's not what you're trying to do here. Take into context the client, the engagement, what's expected, the risk, the reward for you, the reward for the client. Like, it's something that you need to take into consideration. And again, to wrap my mini monologue, that agreement is a reflection of you as an operator and an owner of that business. Is this on brand? Now, it should be professional, and it is a legal agreement, but is it on brand? And
yes.
Is it contextual to that relationship?
Always perception is the key in everything we do. How we dress, how we talk, our all of those things, right? Make sure that it hits, make sure that it's genuine, make sure that it's really who you are and how you want to be viewed as a part of your business community. Don't scare people. It's just, it is not worth your reputation to try to run people off because you want to be the tough business person. You know what I tell everybody when it comes to, and I've coached a lot of entrepreneurs. I'm getting to that point in my career where, I feel like I'm not only creating, but I'm also, I'm trying to give some back. Like, we're talking about here, the toughest business people are the ones that have the greatest capacity to let things go. They have the greatest ability to be able to see the bigger picture and to know when to sort of take the foot off the gas and make sure that your client and who you're working with, that they actually have that value. They're gaining something out of that relationship. And they also have the ability to go, you know what? our relationship may not necessarily be viable anymore. You're not getting a value out of what we're giving to you. So you know what? We need to step back, and I'm not going to keep invoicing you for something that doesn't benefit you. That is where strength and power comes from. It's in understanding the overarching picture of what goes on. And I'll get off my soapbox now, just because, I see a future where entrepreneurs are going to be the foundational aspects of what we do. You don't have to have some multi-trillion-dollar business to be successful, but there's a lot of great ideas out there. And we as business owners need to be supporting others and giving them that runway to get to that opportunity where they can help other people and deliver. It's got to be. And it's got to be a symbiotic sort of relationship that we have with each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. This is, and to kind of bring it back around to the beginning here, that story about, the Bluey and the mom saying, the boring stuff is important, even though it's not fun. Mm-hmm. It's what makes the good part great. Because if you don't have this in place, then you're going to have situations like I saw this on X, or Twitter, a fellow that I follow, and we've been kind of talking back and forth. He asked, should I have created an agreement or a contract with this client? I've only just kind of done like handshake, virtual handshake deals for the past 10 or 15 years, and it's never been a problem. But this time this happened and they wanted something that I think it's not something I can do, but how do I tell them no? And I'm like, wait, back up a bit. You said you didn't sign a contract and you haven't been doing that for 15 years. I was like, you are playing with fire. This is the fact that you went that long without being bit by it is a miracle, but it's bound to come around. And you're not scaring them away. In fact, all you're doing here, if you don't have contracts and you don't have this, is if there is somebody who wants to take advantage of you, and you will most certainly come across those people in life and in business. The great thing about in business is that you can have a contract to say, hey, like, we're not doing business with people who take advantage of me. You can't do that in like your neighbors or your friends and stuff. But in business, you get to go, hey, I like you and I like what you're doing. I think I can help you do it better and I can solve that problem for you. Before we do that, I got a little piece of paper here that we need to walk through and we're going to sign, and it's going to protect you and it's going to protect me from being taken advantage of. It's the boring part, but it's going to make the good part greater. And if we don't do that, it's going to give that person an opportunity to take advantage of me, or it'll give me an opportunity to take advantage of you, because you got nothing to stand on either.
Don't let it happen to yourselves. As you said, Brad, it happens. You will find, and I pray for all of you, it only maybe happens once. I would really hope that it never happens at all. I get it. It's boring. I get that this is sort of dry, but understand that there are nefarious people out there. You do what's necessary to protect yourself. Ask questions of other people. Call me. I'm happy to answer anything that you have, Brad. I'm sure you would do the same for anybody else in the community. We want to be able to spread that knowledge so that we all have a positive experience. So it may be the driest thing, but sometimes it's the driest and most boring things that, Brad, to your point, that give us the most joy, because there is a confidence and a comfort that we're able to do it in a protected place where we know that we're okay to deliver the best product to our clients. Absolutely.
And even if it's not protecting you from, say, nefarious activity or someone wanting to take advantage of you, it'll scare away someone who wants to take advantage of you, because now they can't do it so easily. So that's a good thing. It gets rid of the bad apples. It protects you from anyone who, while they're in the agreement, wants to do something out of bounds or out of scope. But it also does another thing. You mentioned it on the, it's part of the agreement, the exit part of the agreement, for them and for me. So it gives them, hey, if you don't like what's going on and it meets these criteria, you get to fire me. And also I get to fire you for these reasons. And it could be for any reason, or it could be for certain reasons that you determine. I will say one time I had to do that, and I am so grateful that I had that in place, because it was one of the largest projects at the time that I'd been working on. And it was a lot of pressure for me as a sole operator. And it was a large project. It was more that I could handle, but I took it on anyway. I thought, big budget, bigger client, I can do this. But then it started to shift and it started to change. Communication started to become very difficult with the client. They were requesting things that started to venture into the boundaries of scope creep. But then timelines kept getting pushed back on their side of things, and they were harder to get a hold of, and it started to become bigger and bigger and heavier and heavier. And I, at the time, was like, I was very stressed, and I was like, I think this project is contributing to like the well, it's making me so stressed that I can't think. I was losing sleep over it, and part of that stress was I was like, I don't know how to get out of this. And then one day I remembered, I was like, wait, I'm pretty sure. And this was in the earlier stages where I started to do contracts because I did those handshake deals prior, but I started to use contracts. I was like, I think I sent a contract. And so I looked it up. I looked in the emails, saw that I sent a contract. So I said, good, but is there a way out of this? And I read my own contract, and there was an exit clause. And I read it, and it said, for any reason whatsoever, so long as I give written notice via email or mail to this person, I can basically fire the client and leave. And then there were other terms like who owns what and what's the timeline. So, and what wording. So I said, that's it. I was so happy. I sent the email, used the wording, and I said, I'm invoking whatever this is. I'm going to be ending the contract. You've been paid, like you've paid up to the certain amount. I've done no extra work. We're going to halt immediately. I'm going to deliver everything that you need. And I even sent a recommendation for a different contractor that they could contact. I didn't have to, but I said, hey, good buddy of mine does this. And I think you can have a conversation with him.
Sure.
And the client, I was waiting for the client to like get back at me and say, hey, like, I can't believe you're doing this, and be so mad. He actually understood, apologized for the stress. He said he'd been going through a lot of personal issues that has affected his work. And he said, no hard feelings. That's all good. And thank you for the recommendation. And we were done. And I was free. And it was the greatest feeling at the time, getting that exit. And
the warm blanket of a contract.
Yeah, it really saved the day and saved my mental well-being.
It's amazing the things that it will do for you. And I encourage people, think about what's in there. What I'm giving you, what we've talked about today, Brad, this is basics. These are sort of the key elements. Put in other pieces if you feel that it's necessary, especially things that are, very particular to your business. If it's mission critical to your ability to execute and deliver, put those pieces in there. But also, to the point, Brad, that you made, be willing to have those conversations. Be willing to do the extra follow-up with your clients. You don't always necessarily know the conditions in which they're operating. You have to run your business and you have to be profitable. But by the same token, we're all a part of that big ecosystem. So trying to, even if it was if your client in that situation, Brad, said, hey, maybe there's a pause. Can we pause our agreement, for, 60 days or 90 days because I got your client got a new client that needs all kinds of attention. I want to give this, I want to finish it. Let's pause for now. Yeah, that's fine. We'll write, we'll do a quick addendum. We'll just write it in an email. It doesn't always have to be on, super hard, fast, legal document. Write an email. Just make sure there's an acknowledgement back and forth of it. Pause it and move on. It doesn't have to be intimidating. It's sort of like I align these agreements sort of to Wall Street, right? People who do financial things, they have their own vernacular. They have all of these terms, all of these things that they do. But as with most things, once you understand how it works and what those words mean, it becomes very clear very quickly. We do code on the backside of websites. We're doing back end calls, front end. We're doing all. It's our vernacular. It's what we talk about, right? It makes sense to us. The more you dive into these things and realize it's nothing but words, and those words have very basic meanings to them, and you gather that comfort in reading it and understanding it, it's no longer something that you have to be afraid of necessarily, but something that, to what we've been saying over and over, This is a tool to be used to help both sides. And for God's sake, turn it into something that's a positive for people. Why run off organizations or clients because the agreement is too verbose? I mean, I can write agreements for some clients in 5 to 10 minutes. It goes in an email. But then I have other larger based clients where I have to write formal statements of work, formal mutual non-disclosure agreements. You're dropping them into DocuSign or what, so that you're getting electronic signature. It isn't always necessity. You react to the circumstances and you pivot as necessary while making sure that people feel secure. So it astounds me. It astounds me how much once you finally have sort of a standard template of what your agreements look like, how much more you are able to think about your business and how your business operates. Because a lot of times those agreements will actually tell you, well, these are the pieces of information that I need on the upfront in order to help ensure success. Until you start thinking about that and starting to understand input output, you're going to spend cycle upon cycle spinning through all of these things with your clients versus, hey, this is information I need on the upfront. And it totally just sends your engagements on a trajectory that's ridiculously fast. So use them as a tool. They don't always have to be just simply for that safety blanket. Sometimes it's things that make you think more about what your business is doing and maybe what you need, or maybe things that you don't even want to touch. I mean, I've had clients that have gone into agreements and they start looking at, the deliverables and the things, and they're like, I hate doing this. Like, see this thing right here? I hate. Well, why are you doing it? Offload it to somebody else. Bring in a third party to do it. Oh, I never thought about that. Okay. Think about all the different sides to it.
Yeah.
It works. It's easy. It so long as you have that security, it'll work for you. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It frees you. It frees you to do your best work and to feel confident, and it provides comfort and security for your client as well, so that you can get that part of the way and you can both be working and feel trusting of one another. And it creates a better relationship so that you can have that repeat business. And I think it is, though it is the dry part, it is the necessary foundation for these projects and for building a fruitful relationship with your clients on an ongoing basis.
Go get it.
Yeah, go get it. Ryan, thank you so much. This was really insightful, and I'm really excited to have this added to our Creative Crew blog and video library as well. We're going to be we have been recording this, but we're going to be summarizing it and putting all the notes so that you can watch this after the fact, review some things. And Ryan, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, if they have any questions or they have specific questions, how can they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So for the members, Creative Crew members, hit me in the community. I'm out there. By all means, feel free. All takers, just give me a minute to respond. We're running a business at the same time. We're trying to help. Otherwise, RedStarConsultingLLC.com. Feel free to go out, check out things. As you can tell, I'm pretty open about almost anything. I'm not that nickel and dime. I'm not going to charge you for every question you ask. So by all means, please feel free, reach out, questions, comments, concerns, anything. I am always happy. Brad, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be here and to relay a very small portion of my experience and my knowledge. I hope that it's a benefit to as many people as they want to read and go through this. Genuinely, I hope that people take things away here that will help them run their businesses better. And to you, Brad, thank you so much for the community, putting it together and having it. This is a great place for all of us to come together and to be able to share those opportunities and experiences. So keep it cranking, man. I love it. Let's keep hitting it.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. I really, really appreciate that. And once again, to everybody watching, thanks for watching, everyone watching the recording. I hope you enjoyed. Reach out to Ryan if you got any questions. Ryan, we'll catch you later.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Cheers.